Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of our monthly series, our monthly Woman Crush Wednesday series with our featured guest, Ada Williams Prince. Hi, Ada.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited and honored to be on this with you. It's really exciting.
Well, ditto. So, for those who are with us tonight, thank you for joining us. And there was so much excitement about this conversation. But for those who are not familiar with the amazing, spectacularly fabulous Ada Williams Prince, she is Director of Program Strategy and Investments at Pivotal Ventures. But above and beyond that, she really is an established and well-respected thought leader in the space of philanthropy and women's rights and gender justice. So tonight we're going to just talk about your career, your leadership demonstration, how it's evolved over time, and your work at Pivotal, where you direct, as you describe, a high level engagement and strategies to advance social progress in the United States, specifically in the areas of adolescent mental health, both globally and domestically, and accelerating the power and influence of women and girls of color. So I don't know what's a more fantastic thing to talk about than that work and all of the ways in which you have been investing in this space for many, many years. And so, is there anything you want to share before we get into this conversation as you sort of ended your day and got the kiddos settled?
I like how you say ended my day. You know, the day never ends when you have children running around. But I want to say to you, Toya Randall, you look fabulous and are fabulous. And I'm honored to be in a space where you create what you've created with voice, vision, and value. Vision, voice, value, voice, vision, value.
I tell people, however it comes out for you is it's fine. Some folks say it's vision, voice, value. I'm like, then for you, the vision comes first. For some, the voice comes first. For others, value comes first.
The point is those 3 V's are really important. And I think you created a space for all of us with that. So I really am appreciative of you and what you've created for all of us.
Well, thank you. Well, we're going to talk about some stuff you've created too. But first, let's just sort of ground the conversation in the moment, right? And we keep having moments. Voice Vision Value was launched in 2020, sort of in the midst of the pandemic and the uprising. And then we had an election, and then we had an insurrection, and then we had a resurgence of COVID. And so, I think for all of us, we've been pivoting and adjusting and rejiggering ourselves in the face of so many changing dynamics that have brought tremendous depths of both pain and joy. And so for you, can you talk about the evolution of your leadership, or if it has evolved over the past few years as we've navigated crisis after crisis after crisis?
It's so interesting because I think that in crisis creates for women of color, particularly Black women, a sense of purpose in a lot of ways, because we do like hold on to the faith that we can get through. I think that comes from our ancestors, right? So I think for others, crisis creates a moment of panic, of something else. But I think for us as women of color in leadership in particular, it's the moment at which we're kind of forced to a conclusion and we just tend to do our work, right? Because I feel like we're always in a moment of crisis because we take care of everyone but ourselves, which is a whole other area that we can talk about. I think leadership in crisis, though, is what we always show in our everyday lives. So I think when in the pandemic, what you saw were a lot of people looking towards the leadership of Black women in particular, right? They were looking to see what we were going to do. And we showed up in a way that was powerful, determined. We were not thrown off. We were full of faith, full of hope, and we did the work. And that is what everybody looked towards. And I think that's kind of steeped in our DNA. It's part of our culture. It's what our ancestors did. It's what our grandmamas did. It's what our mamas do. So our aunties, you know, and I just, I feel like that leadership is ingrained. And I think there are times when we're allowed to be that and do that, and it shine and, you know, bring forth, you know, fruits and abundance. And then there are times when we're told that, you know, tamp it down a little, or we're being told that, you know, don't do that anymore, or we're being called into somebody's office and you're just a little too much. And could you just not shine so much so this other lady could get her due? So for me, I think the pandemic and all of that was a moment to step into the power that we already have. And it was just being recognized more because we had to take on more. But it wasn't easy. And I don't want it to sound like it was something that it's something that we did naturally, but it was much harder. And it took much more of a toll on our lives. And it decimated all of our communities in a way that I think was truly heartbreaking and hard to come back from. And so now it's just about recovery for most of us.
And what does recovery look like for you? Have you figured that out? Because we're returned to the office, we're getting back on planes, we're in big meetings in hotels and conference spaces. And so is there anything you're doing differently as part of your recovery or recalibration or reimagining, right? What life looks like in the midst of, because we're not on the other side yet, right? We're living in it still.
I think that I learned a lot in the sort of, there's a couple of pandemic benefits. I can't stand children. I don't like being around them, especially my own, but there are some benefits to having them in my house and being around them. So I will say there were some benefits there. I learned a lot about how important it is for me to get outside. And there was a lot of freedom in working from home. There was a lot of freedom there that I didn't know I could have. Things opened up for me in not the things that you did things you do when you don't know. Like I got up early, I put all my clothes on, including the shoes, 3-inch heels every day, got in the car, drove an hour to get to work, drove back an hour, spent 2 hours in commute every day. I will never do that again. I didn't know it was possible not to do that. So there's a lot about the pandemic that teaches us things that we won't do again, right? And that's almost as important and almost as freeing as learning what you will do, and when learning something about yourself and you know who you are as a person. So yeah, we're not doing that again. Even though I love the podcasts, right? Like that's where I listen to all my podcasts. All my East Coast people. It's where I called my mother every day. You know. So it was a good thing, but also I learned a lot.
Yeah. I think it's, you know, for those of us who have the fortune of, you know, some discretion as to how we allocate our time and some flexibility as to, you know, when we show up in an office versus when we work from home, just really being able to own that privilege and own the power in that privilege in a way that, you know, can strengthen our quality of lives in ways that our quality of life was diminished when we were putting on the shoes and getting in the car and commuting hours a day to go into an office. Or for me, it wasn't going into an office, it was getting on planes and traveling all over the country to be in rooms and have meetings. And, you know, COVID sort of forced us all to get still and stay put and figure out how to get the work done in ways that I don't think we thought possible before. Right. And so it's like, I will never fly as much as I did in the 8 years leading up to COVID.
Yeah,
It's unnecessary. I just won't do it.
yeah, that's true.
And so the energy is different, right?
Mhm.
And I think for so many of us, it opened up our creative, space um, to not just reimagine the work, but to reimagine many things about our lives. Like you're describing, being outside is important. And I would imagine you're outside doing things like taking walks and spending time with your kids and just being in nature. So, you and I had a meeting over some food, some vittles, and some drinks in Seattle on November 7th, 2019. And I know
Uh-oh.
because I have the notes. I keep my
Oh,
little notebooks every year and I found the notes. And
uh-oh.
and you were in the process of developing what is now the Women and Girls of Power and Influence strategy. And yeah. And
Ooh, how
so,
much did I have to drink, Toya? Be honest.
well, that's not for public disclosure. Um, but you had this idea and you were sort of working through the concept, and I've got all kinds of notes and little images that were drawn on the pages and the names of people. And so thinking about this sort of creative space and being in a place of privilege and power inside philanthropic institutions, where as Black women we can sort of take our lived experience and our understanding of conditions in communities of color to create new ways in which philanthropy can get the work done. And I think the strategy you developed and the design council, like we were calling it an advisory board, and there was a secondary advisory board, and
Oh, yeah.
right, like, but you were using words like, how do you transform, how do you influence, how do you agitate? And so for these notes and all the other notes that you kept or documented and all the other conversations you had, can you talk about what it was like creating that strategy and convening the community of women who informed that strategy, and what that strategy is and what's happening as a result of that?
First of all, I cannot believe that you remember that
Absolutely.
time. I can't believe it. You're like my historian. It's so wonderful. I'm glad you didn't remember all the really terrible ideas that I had. So since that time, the idea really comes from a place of, me being a Sagittarius and an only child and wanting what I want. And, as a little Black girl who was never listened to, I want a space to dream. I'm a big sci-fi, a big superhero fan, and there is a world that exists in my vision that lives in a place that involves all kinds of people, that involves all kinds of equality and equity and power. And I wanted that for myself and people who look like me. I want to feel comfortable in my own skin. What I ended up doing is convincing Pivotal through a massive strategy that they already had to let me build a place where women of color, women and girls of color could dream and design a strategy for them, for us, by us. And that was what we did. The actual strategy is one that concerns itself with gender equality. How do you look at accelerating the pace of change around gender equality? And it was about women's power and influence in the United States. How do we accelerate that change? It's going at a glacial pace, too slow. It's going to take 207 years to get to gender parity in this country. Ain't nobody got time for that. So how do we accelerate it? How about me, Melinda French Gates, give $1 billion and 10 years to accelerate it in this specific way? And that is this strategy, women's power and influence. There are sectors that have an outsized impact in society, like women in tech, women in public office, women in academia, women in entrepreneurship, women in investing, women in public office. I think I said that twice, but it's important. And then what are the barriers that they have to their power and influence? How about caregiving, biased narratives, sexual harassment, and discrimination? What about mass mobilization and data and evidence? And, how do we think about that? Those three big building blocks constructed this massive strategy that she gave $1 billion in 10 years to. There was a piece that's missing. I think you know what I'm going to say. It was women and girls of color, right? So that's how I went to them and I said, that piece is missing. So, and if you want it to be designed well, then it will require a targeted universalist approach.
Yeah.
That means give me the money to build and design with women and girls of color a strategy that's intersectional, intergenerational, and that works on the power and influence of women and girls of color. That means they have the power to make decisions, the power to shape perspectives, they have control over resources. So that's what we did. We got these women in a room. And of course, when you ask about leadership in a crisis, I got the agreement to do this in December of 2019. So January 2020, I'm like, woo, it's going to be a good year. Yeah, that's what they say about making plans, right? God laughs when you make a plan. So 2020 started and we could do nothing but continue in a crisis. And we built this community of women of color to build this strategy that we knew was going to be really important because it represented a lot of resources. And so it became an intersectional strategy that really was about where women and girls of color had the most power, but also where they faced the most inequity. And because it was intersectional, it's about economics, about safety and security, about storytelling and narrative, about girls of color specifically, and then a real theme of research going through it. So that strategy, funded against that strategy, had all spent the money. They said, here's the money, spend money. I mean, after we had to get approval, and that was a whole other situation. But anyway, got the approval, got the funding out the door. Now we had to talk about measurement and learning. Well, with measurement and learning, it was really important that we did this centering equity, centering the intersection of gender and race and class. And so in doing so, we took out the word evaluation. It's very extractive. And we stayed within the purpose of measurement and learning and tracking what our organizations as partners track themselves. We're not asking you for 1 billion reports. We're not asking you for only quantitative data. We don't do quantitative supremacy here. We're trying to make sure that qualitative and quantitative metrics are together, right? So really, really being very mindful of how we work together to learn. So we have cohorts of organizations that are in the same area, and we want to do a cross section. Oh, I see, I don't know if it's true, but I see that one of our partners is on the call, Lynette Rawlings from the Policy Academies, and I'm very, very proud of her. So that's what we did. We spent all this time, we took the intention of making sure that women and girls of color have power by putting capital into their hands. They really didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And so as you go along the process of getting the strategy itself built differently, right? Getting the strategy approved at a very high level, so that it represents a lot of funding and resources, and then being explicit about making sure that it is only held by women and girls of color leaders, right? And then being explicit about, like, it's not about one organization, it's about ecosystem and infrastructure building. Because if you're in a chronically underfunded space, it's impossible to build that up in like a couple of years. General operating funding, multi-year funding, these things are really important. because it's not a space that we pour into the leadership and trust women and girls of color. We don't trust their leadership. And so this is a way of both showing trust, both in the design from the top to all the way across as the journey. And so, they probably won't let me do it again, but I did it the first time. So maybe we'll convince other people to do it too.
So I've often heard over the course of the last few years, this phrase that, we've been prepared for this moment. And you spoke about it within the context of all the ways in which Black women are called to lead at the intersection of their roles as partners, as parents, right, as folks in the workforce, as I sometimes describe as a chief operating officers of our communities, because we've got to sort of think about all of the things. And so, is there a particular way in which you think about your experiences leading you up to coming to Pivotal, so that when the opportunity presented itself to sort of see what was proposed, recognize what was missing, women and girls of color, right? Like, how do you impact power and influence and access of women around the world and not concentrate on the primary group of folks who are most disadvantaged, but to see the opportunity for you to inform the strategy in a way that would center the voice, the investment in, and the power building among women and girls of color, right? And build an ecosystem in a way that hadn't been part of the design initially. So do you know, or do you have some sense of what got you ready for the moment, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, what I think is that we as Black women, as women of color, I think we change every space we are in. I think it's impossible for us not to.
Yeah.
And I was hired into a space that was a startup, right? It was 20 white people and me. I mean, there's probably one other Black girl, but she wasn't there no more. So then like maybe 2 months later, another Black woman was hired. And then we had the classic situation where you have an organization that is majority white and there's like a smattering of other people of color, but I was the only one in leadership, and that was quasi leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So in that situation, you end up changing every part of it because you're called to, because there's nobody else around. And so in those situations, you end up being the person, whether you want to be or not. We're often called to be leaders in every aspect because that's who we end up being. And then if you are even when you're in a majority space of Black women or women of color, we support each other's leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So even if we're all together, we're like, oh yeah, girl, you look so good. Look, you can do this or you can do it. We support each other. And that is not a space I feel like is natural for an office environment, for any real environment that is predicated on white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonialism. Mm-hmm. So since that is the majority of spaces that are in the world, it means that in every space that we find ourselves in, we change the space. So I don't know if I was, into your question, if I was prepared for the moment, or if this like things were leading me to it. It's just what happens.
You couldn't do anything else
because of who we are.
Missing pieces were so glaring. All you could do was speak up and speak out. So in these spaces that you've described, predominantly white spaces, and the ways in which we have to sort of position ourselves as the carrier of so much. We were together recently in a space with all Black women. And that was designed solely for the purpose of creating a place of respite or a place to pause and take a beat from all the things that we find ourselves engaging and confronting and having to address in predominantly white spaces. How do you, what's the word? When you can't get away and be in community with 10 other Black women for an extended period of time, right? Like, how do you recharge, repair yourselves in the in-between times if you're going into a space of, where you're the only one all the time? Like, that's where you go to work every day, or that's how you earn your living. So how do you take care in between?
It's probably a good idea to own stock in Jack Daniels, but other than that, I think it's so hard. You're asking me this at a time when I have a really rough week. So hard. I mean, I used to do this by myself. I will say I didn't have a team for a really long time. And I was able to hire 2 Black women on my team, and they are brilliant and genius. And sadly, they are the only things I have at the office. And I almost believe that I rely on them too much. And I hate that. And I can't help it because that's who I have, right? And I don't know what I would do without them. And I think there are too many spaces where we exist alone, and we are alone. And then when we get home, we are still wholly on our own. We have our partners but I can't really take this home to my children. There's no one who understands what we go through, the little things, like the little tiny things, like this, an email that's just so well-intentioned or the like, oh yeah, I just told so-and-so this, but I didn't mean any trouble by it. But you didn't have to have my name in your mouth, which caused me to get an email from somebody else, which got me in trouble with so-and-so, right? Like the little things that happen that just they're like a death by 1,000 cuts. And I think there isn't anyone that we have. And so the space that you created for Black women, any space that's created for Black women to be together and just have a sense of joy, because there is the joy of Blackness, of Black women, is the antidote, and it's the only antidote. And this is why, and I know you're gonna make fun of me, but this is why the Black Lady Sketch Show is so important.
Yeah.
Because that is a space of joy for Black women. And there's also Z-Way. If you haven't seen that one, that's another one. But it's so small, right? Like it's so small and so little. Insecure, like there's all these new places where that's happening. Yeah. But I stick by places like the Black Lady Sketch Show and Z-Way, because it centers our joy in a way that allows us, because that's the only way we have to release this stuff. If we spent all of our time talking about all the little things that happen, like I could go through a list of what happened to me just today. I mean, just today. I was in the office yesterday and like 4, 5, 6, 7 things happened because I was physically in the office, right? I was at I could be at a leadership retreat over here or something over here. And it's not just about being in predominantly white spaces. It's about the culture, because we all swallow it to different degrees. We are all of us victims and survivors of white supremacy and patriarchy. And it comes out of all of us in different ways. And so even if all skin folk ain't kinfolk, you're still my kinfolk. So I still got to support you. And I'm not going to talk bad about you in mixed company.
Yeah.
Right? But I still got to fight you as my sister. Right. And I still got to come, I still have to come correct with you. And the toughest part of this is that unless we center our Black joy with other Black women, women of color, even with Indigenous women, unless we're centering that joy with each other, that is the only antidote that I have found. It's the only antidote that I've found.
Yeah, I grew up with my mother, my two grandmothers, and seven aunts. And I've often said, like, I grew up in a women's giving circle, right? Like, there was just all this reciprocal contribution of time and guidance. And, when my mother, there were times when my mother was like, I am done. I can't with this girl no more. But there were my grandmothers there to sort of take me in and always see the hope and the promise. And so, when you talk about the criticality of us seeing and being in space with one another to provide safety, to provide camaraderie, to provide sisterhood, to provide laughter and silliness, and, to wipe the tear, right? I grew up watching that in real time in this community of women that made up my family. And it does pain me, right, when I see and experience it, the point you made, all skin folks and kin folks, right? But when it comes at us from us,
Yeah,
that's a different kind of dagger. That's a different kind of trauma. That's a different kind of impact. And so I think, again, going back to the community you created through your design council, right? Because I think what we're trying to do, as well as get the work done and get money out to folk in community who can center strategies that really are informed by lived experience and lived expertise. It's also creating these new demonstrations of leadership. Leadership demonstrations that really are grounded in equity and inclusion, right? Leadership demonstrations that really do sort of present a more balanced way of partnering and engaging and supporting one another. And I think that is a unique sort of way in which I think about legacy, and I think about the vision for the work. So when you receive the Visionary Award, right, from New York Women's Foundation, for me, that was powerful, because oftentimes the people who get those kinds of awards are not the directors or the advisors, right? They're the CEOs and the trustees and the presidents. And so the idea that, you've got 20 plus years of work and contribution across philanthropy and nonprofit leadership globally. And so, it made perfect sense to me. But like, how do you find out is it like the Emmys, how people are waiting to see if they get nominated for an Emmy or waiting to see if they're getting an Oscar? Like, how did you learn that you were receiving the award? And just like, what was that like for you?
Oh my God, you're adorable. And it's not like the Emmys. You know how it is, it's so hard for me to even talk about this. And I just spoke. So the New York Women's Foundation is a 35-year-old institution, and it is an institution of New York. It has been around for a long time. It has given, just since 1987, invested hundreds of millions of dollars in more than 500 organizations in New York that, built power for women and girls and their families. It's a critical institution for women and girls in New York. I received a phone call from Ana Oliveira, the head of the New York Women's Foundation, and I didn't believe her. I mean, she was like telling me all this stuff, like, and she's Brazilian, so she's just very like effusive, and she's like, This is presented to a strategic philanthropist whose contributions are aligned with the ethos of the foundation, New York Women's Foundation. You know, you're a clear reflection of the values we hold. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't understand what he's saying. He's like, we are dedicated to, respect and transparency and trust and partnership. And, the work that she was also on the design council. So she like saw the work, she was a part of it. She's like, this is really important. And she's like, and I want to know if you will accept this award. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? So she had to convince me to accept it first. Took about 2 phone calls, plus a phone call from another board member, Yvonne Moore. And then there was a whole letter. I kept the letter for 2 weeks because I didn't really believe it. Like I could not believe it, that it was possible for me to receive something like this. So I didn't tell my boss or anything. I didn't tell anybody for a while. And I was like, oh, there's this award happening. It was my staff, of course, who badgered me into being like, you need to tell somebody that you won this award. And by the way, it's on your calendar and it's coming up. So yeah, I had to, it's really special. It's really special. It makes, the people who have won this Vision Award, Tarana Burke, Nicole Hannah-Jones, Billie Jean King, Edgar Villanueva, Abigail Disney, it was really hard for me to accept. It's still hard for me to talk about. It's still hard for me to believe that I deserve it, but I am a visionary. I continue to be a visionary. So having a Vision Award is helpful for me to get to that place. Maybe next year when I can thank the next Vision Award winner, I'll be like, yes, and I too am a Vision Award winner.
Why was it so hard for you to believe that you were?
Did you hear what I said? I said Tarana Burke, Nicole Hannah-Jones, Billie Jean King, Lema Gabawi. Yeah.
And Ada Williams Prince. I don't understand what are you grappling for here?
Toya, do you remember when we were together, all together, and all of us in that room of really brilliant Black women, we went around and we said, Toya, we want to tell you how much you mean to us, how much you've done for this space. There are certain legacy Black women in philanthropy. We talk about Lynetta, we talk about, all these people. And we were like, and you're one of them. And you were like, well, no, I'm not so-and-so. I'm not so-and-so, right? So,
well, okay, let's be clear. Part of my resistance is because I don't think I'm that old. It's like, no, not yet.
No, but your stature, your celebrity status, that's what we're talking about.
So that was my sort of vain, immature response. So I want to invite folks who are with us to put questions in the chat for Ada to respond to you directly. You can see who some of the folks are, Ada, who are with us. And so yeah, if any of you have questions, please share them. But Ada, I'm gonna first ask my child. So we talked about the children earlier, and we had agreements with our children about how they were going to not, interrupt. And Zachary seems to have forgotten that he is supposed to be upstairs and not down here. So please go upstairs. Thank you, my child. So we're going to move the conversation into the sisterhood and support space, right? Because you mentioned our time together and some of the ways in which it was meaningful and the joy that we share being the antidote to so much of the not so pretty and the not so easy parts of this work. And so who are some of the women who you look to and lean on? And you've talked about some of them who were part of the design council, to support you. Like who's nurtured your leadership and served as a source of, support and sisterhood for you?
Yeah, I mean, you are certainly one of them, of course. And I think the women of the Design Council really gave me the strength to do this work, this particular work. And I guess I would say, my mother, even though, and I giggle because even though she never understood anything that I did, right? I worked a long time with refugee women and children overseas. Now, I would go to places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, all over Africa, all over the Middle East, all over Asia. And I would tell her things like, I'm going to Nepal, I'm going to live there for a year, I'm living in a refugee camp, et cetera, et cetera. She'd be like, now I got to go tell your cousin. Now I got to go tell your cousin. And I got to tell so-and-so. And she's like, where are you going again? And I would say, like, remember in the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark? And, they went to Nepal. You remember the map? She's like, oh, yeah. So then she would go and tell everybody. But she has always been my biggest supporter, even if she didn't understand what I was doing. That kind of faith in me that's like unshaken. She's never doubted. She's never questioned. And this little Black girl in LA who went to her with a brochure and said, I'm going to be a foreign exchange student in Greece in high school, right? She never questioned it, not once. And so when all the other kids, my whole family was like, what is she doing? She wants to go to a small liberal arts college in the middle of New England. What is wrong with her, right? Through all of this, she was always my biggest supporter. And having that kind of unshaken, no matter what I wanted to do, that's what kind of gave me the support to keep pushing for stuff that I know when people tell me no, I'll figure it out. I'm going to keep going because I had a lot of people tell me no. I barely got through high school. I had people tell me that I would never finish college. I had a fourth grade teacher who was like, oh, you just stay cute. You're never going to make it. So in the face of that, if you don't have that like backbone, so she's been my biggest supporter around anything I wanted to do, and telling me that I could do that. So she's always in the back of my head when I come up with a crazy idea and sit down with you and you write it out. And I'm like, this is what I think. These are my plans for world domination. Yeah.
And so now you have a daughter and a son, but how does that show up, like that unwavering support and faith? Because there's plenty of stuff my kid tells me about like technology and I don't understand any of it. There's a whole new language that it's English, but I still don't understand.
Same, man, same.
And so how does that look for you as a mother supporting a young daughter who, I mean, I don't know if she's told you she's going to be an exchange student in Greece yet, but.
She hasn't. She's actually said she's going to be a unicorn when she grows up. I keep, for a while she said she was going to be a doctor. It's really hard, right? Because I am trying not to put so much pressure on them, but every day I'm like, what are you going to be when you grow up? No, seriously. Like, do you have a job yet? Because somebody's got to pay the rent. Like, I find these things coming out of my mouth. The other day, my daughter was like, this little boy likes me. And I was like, what's his name? Does he have a job? Because I don't. And of course, my husband's like, can you calm down a little? Like, she's 8. Like, it's not, So I feel I've got to like calm down. But one thing I realize is that I can't make them who I want them to be. Yeah. I had to give that up a long time ago. And I just offer them things and I try to put things in front of them. And the other day, like the things I put in front of them, they hate. So I'm like, except for Black Panther, the movie, like we've watched it 1,000 times. And there'll be things that are like non-negotiables. I was like, you have to like Beyonce. They do. It happens, right? I can't control that, but I force lots of things. And the other day, they're really into graphic novels right now. I'm like, you got to read chapter books, right? And I complain, I'm like, you guys aren't reading enough books, right? They read before they go to bed an hour a night, whether they're reading graphic novels or what, they get in bed and they're reading all night long. And I'm so mad. I'm like, why are you reading this graphic novel about, Ta-Nehisi Coates' version of Black Panther? How dare you? Right? Like, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? I could be really hard on them. I just need to let them be who they are for right now. And I gave my son I'm always like sneaking stuff into his bed where the books are. And I snuck in Octavia Butler's graphic novel of Kindred. And I also put in there George Takei's The Things They Carried about Japanese internment. Okay, come on. All right. Yes, I know. I'm obviously a horrible mother. But anyway, he read them both.
Yeah.
And I was very proud. And I told my friend, and she was like, can't you just give him like Space Penguin? I was like, no, I can't. No.
No, I think that's really sweet though, that they indulge you.
But they don't. They don't like Beyonce.
No, he read the book. Well, I don't know if my kid likes Beyonce either.
No, I don't.
He does not
understand what's happening to the world. Right.
So, so when you think about your leadership, right? What do you think serves you well in this moment? You're preparing to go back up to bat, right? For another pot of resources to put back out into the next phase of the strategy. So are there things you've learned along the way that you think will serve you well as you get ready to go into this next chapter? And we talked about some of this when we were together in May at the retreat, like what is serving you well? And are there things you want to let go, right? Things you want to not do anymore?
I think, I'll start with what I want to let go of. I think I'd like to let go of the stress the pressure and stress that I put on myself. Because I do tend to put a lot more on myself than I think what other people are putting on me. And sometimes I spend a lot of energy on things that may not be where they should be spent, right? Like I want to spend less energy on stuff that's not as important as I think it is, right?
Mm-hmm. I think we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty.
I want to play chess. Like I want to play chess and not checkers. I'm out here playing checkers. Everybody else is playing chess. Like I want to be able to play chess.
I don't know that that's true. Visionary award winners are not chess player. I'm sorry, checker players. Folks who are sort of walking into a room and looking at $1 billion strategy and saying, this is what's missing. I'm going to go show you and tell you how to do that in partnership with other women of color from around the country. And you are going to pay them for their time and their ideas. That's not checkers, my dear. So I hate to disappoint you, but you are not playing checkers. And we all are doing things that we shouldn't be doing. Yeah. So great.
I think it's about letting go, but your question about like what I sort of want to see my leadership doing, I guess I would like to continue, I think, the leadership I think that I can exhibit is one that I realized just this week, because I had a whole situation, is one that is shared. I want to continue, or at least do more shared leadership. And by that, I mean, when I get to this place, I want to make sure that I'm sharing that power with others in a way that where I'm not like elbowing people out of the way, I can be reflective enough to see when I'm doing that. Because I had to watch a sister do that in front of me, like just be like, and I'm doing this and it's going really great. And it was like, it was all in her head that she was sharing power with others. So I don't ever, oh, now I'm back to what I don't want to do. What I would like to do is make sure that I'm reflective enough to see when I'm not sharing power with people.
Yeah. And I think and having people around you, because we don't always see it, but having those trusted advisors. Carmen James Randolph always says, if you tell me if my slip is showing.
That is a very Carmen thing to say. Mm-hmm.
So, right, like having people and us agreeing that is what we will do. You will call me out,
Yeah.
or if we need to have a meeting, right?
But then that is leadership, right? Because if
yeah.
you love someone, that's what I want my leadership steeped in love and truth, so that I can tell you the truth and still love you enough, right, to call you in and push your leadership to the next level.
Absolutely. And
that's
I think
what I would like to do. That's how I want my leadership to.
Yeah. And I think that is a, to your point again, around sort of how we show up in these spaces, that is unique to us, because we understand there's not a lot of room for misses.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we are here to win. And in order for us to win, we have to be in relationship with one another in a trusted and loving way, to have those hard conversations so that we can pivot, course correct, and keep at it, right? The cost is too great for us to be fooling around, especially right now. And the stakes just get higher and higher.
Every day. Every day.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, they just get higher every day. You're absolutely right about that.
So
I have a question for you.
Yes, dear.
Have you ever felt like you've gotten to the point where like enough is enough, right? I mean, there's, especially in philanthropy, have you met people, or what is your experience of people getting to the point where it's like, I'm at this place of power and leadership and I can't do it anymore? What do you advise them? Stay in the position of power and get through it, because with great power comes great responsibility, a la Spider-Man, Uncle Ben? Or what do you advise at that point? Because I definitely found myself in that position.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of deeper assessment of whatever that ecosystem is, right? Because there are while currently Black women represent the largest community of color, right, in professional philanthropy, there are more of us Black women than any other community of color right now. CEOs, admin assistants, like up and down the talent pipeline. So when we find ourselves in these spaces and places, and I found myself there 13 years ago when I worked for another foundation, and 10 years ago, where it's like, I think I've done whatever it was I was here to do, I've done it. And I'm ready to do something else, right? And so I had a conversation with William Bell, who's the president and CEO of Case Family Programs, where I work now. And he asked me, a series of questions, just to help me get clear. Like, do you want to stay in philanthropy? Right? Because I had amassed at that point 15, 16 years of executive experience in both nonprofit and philanthropic leadership and management. And so it's sort of like, what do you do next with these skills, right? With the knowledge, with the relationships, with what you've learned about community philanthropy and place-based giving and strategy. So while I was done where I was clear that I wanted to take all that I had gained to contribute someplace else. And so I went from working at a regional philanthropic organization to working at a national foundation. So those questions that he asked me, do you want to stay in philanthropy? how soon are you ready to make a move? How much money do you make now? How much more money do you want to make?
Mhm.
um, are you willing to relocate? Right? Those were
Mhm.
the questions that sort of set me in motion around what I could do next. So I was never done with philanthropy because I understand the power of
Mhm.
this sector and the access and influence that we have that
Mhm.
really can have meaningful impact, right? And
Mhm.
so really being clear about that for me is what helped me make the decision to move on to the next organization. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, I would not be able, I wouldn't have done, I couldn't do voice, vision, value anywhere else except inside philanthropy,
Yeah,
right?
truth.
Yeah,
So Spider-Man lives. Spider-Man lives.
yeah, yeah. Well, my last question for you, you answered it back in 2020 when we did your profile for the website, but I don't know if it has changed. Um,
Uh-oh.
so yeah, voice, vision, or value, which matters most to you and why?
Uh-oh. I don't know what I said back then. You want me to answer it without knowing what I said back then? Uh-oh. Okay, I'll
Because
tell you. I
it
think
may be different now.
yeah, it might be different now because I think it's vision.
Mm,
Right now it's vision because I am in a place of with what's going on in the world, I think we need vision. Um, and that vision has to be of a better future.
mhm, mhm.
And philanthropy is not going to save us. Like we are the only people who can.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
Well,
but
thank
I
you.
also think value. I also want to pick value because I want us to value ourselves. So
Yeah,
see what I did there?
yeah.
And I think we should be heard. So then I kind of put the voice in there. What did I say last time?
I'm not gonna tell you.
I'm gonna look at the website.
I'm not gonna tell you. But thank you so much, Ada. You are one of the smartest people I know, and I say that all the time to women in these conversations. And someone said, "You say that to everybody." I'm like, because it's true. I get to hang out and spend time with really smart women who are doing some amazing things that, um, going back to the point you made earlier, really do center in the sharing of power and the sharing of resources and the sharing of knowledge and the sharing of love and joy. And so thank you for living into those values. The New York Women's Foundation saw that in you, and that's why you got that award. And it is a beautiful demonstration of leadership that more folks should model. And so I wish you all the best as you navigate your next time up to bat. I have no doubt that you will walk away with the bag, as the young folks say.
Oh, thank you, Toya. I love you and you bring me joy every time. Thank you so much for having me. It was my dream to be on a podcast.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for just talking about you and not so much the work, but just you and what makes you the phenomenal woman that you are. And
Well,
so I
thank you.
appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty.
I'll never forgive you for that, but thank you so much for having me. Love you.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We will see you next month, Black Philanthropy Month. We will do this every Wednesday in August as part of our annual celebration of Black Philanthropy Month. So continue to follow us on social media, and we'll be releasing the guest for August, I think next week. So stay tuned, take care, and remember, I said, love each other. We got to love each other as women in this work. And so we say good night.